It was the early 1600s. The New World of America had been discovered, and the excitement of freedom and opportunity was rich in the British Isles and across all of Europe. American colonies and port towns were growing, and life there was blossoming with domestic wealth. Removing themselves from oppression, hundreds and thousands of hopeful immigrants left their homes for a chance at the American dream. Among them was found the Kidd family. They were originally from Soham, a small community in Cambridge, England. Roger Kidd was the first of the family known to have successfully made the long and arduous journey west, settling in Jamestown, Virginia. He would be followed by Thomas Kidd, who settled in Lancaster County, Virginia. It was here that most of the family resided, although a few of them would spread to Charleston, South Carolina, and Philadelphia, and other colonial settlements. After several years, the family would move to Polk County, Missouri, where Leroy Anderson Kidd would raise his family. Numbered among his children was George Washington Kidd, who was named after the famous Army general and president. George Washington Kidd married Mary Elinda Morrow, and with her had 10 children. Despite the poor conditions of the ground and tough country, George worked as a farmer to support a large family. By this time it was 1898, and although the Civil War had been decidedly won by the North, slavery and racism were still rampant in the southern states. George Washington Kidd found himself caught up in these destructive social patterns and became a member of the Ku Klux Klan. George seemed to be content with his life at that point, but it wasn't until one stormy night when the future of George Washington Kidd and the rest of his family would change forever. 2 Mormon missionaries were stranded near the Kidd farm in the hills of northern Tennessee and were in search of shelter. After hearing their petition, George reluctantly agreed to let them stay, on the condition that they spoke no word of their religion or beliefs. George was not only a member of the Ku Klux Klan, he was also a deacon in the Baptist church and had little tolerance for Mormons. But it was that simple act of kindness that sparked the turn of events that would follow. As the elders left the next morning, they would leave a copy of the Book of Mormon. George read the book and believed it to be true. His family joined him in his newfound faith, and together they made the trek to Utah and Idaho, where they were free from the religious persecution that was so common in the South. George Clement was the second oldest son of George Washington Kidd and was the primary caretaker of the farm and family as his father's health had deteriorated, and the eldest brother, Walter, had moved west to work on the railroad. When the family began to move west, George Clement was one of the last to leave. He would arrive in Cache Valley, Utah, in 1907. He settled at the southern end of the valley in a small town called Paradise, where one of the missionaries that had taught the Kidd family in Tennessee, Allie Jackson, lived and worked as a sheep herder. Clement joined him in his work and began to make a life for himself.
He came to the Allie Jackson home. Allie had returned from his mission and was home. And when he pulled into the yard and stopped the team, got off, Dad, George C. Kidd, jumped off the other side of the buggy and started to take care of the horses and lead them. And interestingly, the 6 Jackson daughters were in the house. Clustered around the window, they were anxious to get a look at this George Kidd who was coming to town, sponsored by their brother. They didn't know which one was George and which one wasn't. But Mother, Minnie, as she looked out the window, she says, "The one that jumped off and is helping Dad with the horses, that's mine."
The two would court for several years before marrying. George Clement homesteaded in Raft River, Idaho, when he wasn't herding sheep, and kept himself very busy. While away from paradise, he and Minnie would occasionally write each other letters, but they were anything but romantic. George Clement was very formal and respectful, and very much focused on his work. After nearly 6 years of courtship, the two were finally married on January 2nd, 1913, in the Logan LDS Temple. Shortly after being married, the young couple moved to Idaho, eventually settling in Drummond, a small town about 20 miles northeast of Rexburg. George Clement and Minnie would have 5 children together: Fern, Earl, Nelda, Clark, and George Clement's namesake, George Jackson, or Jack, as he would be known, born in July of 1923. Clement had a small farm in Drummond, and the children would all learn the principle of hard work at a very young age, milking cows, feeding pigs, and digging irrigation ditches. And while Clement farmed, Minnie canned. Everyone pitched in and worked hard to keep the family afloat, especially during the hard years of the Great Depression. Despite their great hardships, the family still managed to have fun. They regularly entertained company, played farm games, and would hold local rodeos in their barnyard for the kids.
These were relative pioneer times. There was no radio until I was older, no television, no electricity. Life was pretty primitive, and the only entertainment we had was what we could create. When a group of the kids would get together, and Dad was quite a youth person, they would come oft times to our place. And sometimes on an afternoon, they'd gather in the neighborhood calves, put them in our yard, and have a little buckaroo rodeo. They'd catch the calves and put a surcingle on them, and then talk somebody into riding them. But I never found it in my heart to really prove my manhood by riding a calf. And I never got hurt, but it just wasn't my idea of fun.
Jack attended Farnham Grade School until the 8th grade, where he graduated with a class of 11 students. He would then attend Ashton High School, now North Fremont High School, which was a challenge for him. Since George Clement had taken employment with the county, Jack was laden with great responsibilities to care for the farm, seeing as his 2 older brothers had moved away. But Jack didn't complain, and managed the farm, helped with the family, and excelled in his schooling over the next several years. Spare time was hard to come by for the young man, who often overworked himself, but when it did, Jack took advantage of it. It wasn't uncommon to see him with his friends at a local dance or church social, although he wasn't much for dancing.
I enjoyed flirting with the girls, and back in those days, you didn't go to the dance as a couple and cling on to one another all night. You'd go and have the first dance and maybe 2 or 3 dances with your date through the evening, but by and large, when you got through dating, the girls stood on one side of the hall and the boys stood on the other. I could usually get a ride to the dance, but I didn't have any transportation to take a date, and besides, I kind of liked my freedom. So I went to school activities. I just didn't feel inclined to get emotionally attached to somebody at that point in my life. And the thought of going on a date with a girl, frankly, would have scared me to death.
Just a year after his graduation, Jack was drafted into the Army to fight against Nazi Germany and its ally, Japan. Jack was scheduled to report to Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City. his father, George Clement, drove him to the bus station in St. Anthony, Idaho, and there had a father-son heart-to-heart. Clement had lived a life that Jack tried his best to emulate. Everything Jack had learned or obtained in his life he credited to the example given by his father, and now, after living his entire life close to home and family, it was time for Jack to say goodbye.
My departure for the military was kind of a traumatic experience emotionally. Dad was not one to display a lot of emotion, but he put his arms around me and gave me a big hug and said, "Goodbye, son," with such finality that when I got on that bus, my thought was, he knows something I don't know. I'm not going to come back. He has a premonition that this is a one-way trip. It was sometime 15, 20 years later that Aunt Willie sent me a letter he had written to her when he got home. It was tear-stained, and he had written something to this effect: "Dear sister, I've got to write, I've got to talk or tell someone. I just got back from St. Anthony putting my son Jack on the bus. I couldn't tell him what was in my heart. I am quite sure it's the last time I'll ever see him. The doctor has told me that I only have about 6 months to live." You know, I understood then what Dad was feeling when he said goodbye to me. No wonder he was choked up and full of pain, emotional pain. But I was grateful to understand that because it made me understand and appreciate and love him all the more.
Jack's service in the military would take him all over the United States before finally leaving the country. After only a few weeks of serving as quartermaster at Fort Douglas, he was called and offered a position to serve in the Air Force, which Jack happily accepted. From Salt Lake City, Jack would be reassigned to Denver University, where he began his studies and training. After 10 weeks in Denver, he was sent to the Santa Ana Air Force Base in California for more training. His pilot training would officially begin months later at Hemet, California. But while at Hemet, Jack contracted pneumonia and was sent to the sick bay for nearly 2 weeks. It was not long before doctors also discovered that Jack had a slight heart murmur. Jack was devastated when he heard the news, knowing that a heart condition would more than likely disqualify him from the competitive pilot training program. Strangely enough, however, when he had recovered from pneumonia and the doctors did a final physical examination before sending him back to Hemet, the heart murmur was gone. Jack would eventually enter navigation school at San Marcos, Texas, to become a navigator rather than a pilot. But it was while he was in Texas, in the early months of 1944, that he would receive the devastating news of his father's death.
Well, when I got word of Father's passing, I was really not surprised. I was pained, obviously, but not surprised.
At this point, Jack had 2 years of military service under his belt, and with the war now at an end, was given the opportunity to make a good career for himself in the military. The decision to stick with the military was not hard for Jack, originally.
When I'd completed my military duties and the war was over and I'd signed up to get a regular Army commission and stay in the Air Force, there was nothing financially awaiting me in Ashton. As I had finished or was finishing my 4 years of service, Mother wrote and asked me to come home, that she needed me and Clark needed me. I really wrestled over that. I didn't quite understand how fully they needed me. And I knew that I could support the family pretty well with my military pay. But to go home was to go home to poverty. And yet, somehow, as I pondered and prayed that question about my future, it just seemed like that was the thing I should do. It was morally right that I should go home. If Mother felt she needed me, then that's where I ought to be. And so I went to see the commanding officer and told him I had family circumstances that really dictated that I should get a discharge. And I remember he blew up on me and said, "What are you trying to do, Lieutenant? Make a fool out of me? I've just endorsed your regular Army commission application. It's on the desk at the Pentagon, and now I'm going to have to write and say, no, I made a mistake in recommending this man. He wants out." Feeling like I just goofed badly in terms of the military. Nevertheless, I persisted with him, got released, and came home.
Soon after returning home, Jack was approached by an old high school acquaintance who made a business proposal to him to go in 50-50 and buy a local service station. Jack felt okay about the deal and put up his share of the money under the impression that the two of them would run the place as partners. The service station was purchased, but after just 3 weeks, his business partner said he wasn't interested anymore and took off. Although Jack obtained full ownership of the station, he also obtained a full ownership of the workload and the responsibilities that came along with it. Meanwhile, Minnie's health had been deteriorating rapidly. She died about 7 months after Jack had returned home. The night before she died, Jack had come home late from the station to find her waiting up for him in the cold, dark house.
As I entered the living room, Mother spoke to me out of the dark. It frightened me. But I turned on the light, and there she was sitting in the dark on the couch, and she was almost purple. She was cold. And I started to chastise her and said, "Mother, what in the world are you doing up at this hour of the night?" And she said, "Well, I was afraid to go to bed for fear I'd miss you. And I have to talk to you. Come and sit down here for a few minutes." Well, I reluctantly did. I got a blanket wrapped around her, but went and sat down, and she just kind of unloaded on me. She says, I feel a great need to join your dad, and yet I can't until I know that Clark will be taken care of. Will you see that he is properly treated and supported and encouraged religiously? And I was uncomfortable. I'd never talked to Mother about death and final things. It was just not something we discussed. So yeah, I would have promised anything she asked, little realizing that she would never talk to me again, nor to anyone else.
About a year after Minnie's death, Jack took what little money he had and put it towards serving a mission. He would soon receive his call to serve a mission in the southern states. Jack had been to the South before during his military service and was in no real hurry to return, but he didn't let the location or the language stop him. He soon came to understand that it didn't matter where you served, but how you served. He left in November of 1948, while Clark was still a senior in high school, leaving him to care for the station in Jack's absence. Boarding a train from Salt Lake City to Atlanta, Jack embarked on a journey that would prove to be one of his life's greatest tests to that point. Feelings in the South toward the Mormon Church were still less than spectacular. Between the harassment of the Protestants and the abuse from the Ku Klux Klan, being a missionary in the South was a hard life. Jack soon got a taste of that gilded Southern hospitality as he and his companion traveled by foot through the swamplands and wilderness of Florida from Daytona Beach to Tampa Bay to attend a district conference. The elders were refused the courtesy of shelter, food, and water by nearly every door they knocked on. One angry resident threatened their lives, insisting that if they didn't leave, they'd die. Shortly after the district conference, Jack would be transferred into the mission office in Atlanta, where he would serve for 19 months and the remainder of his mission, after which he would return home to Ashton and the old service station. Earlier in his life, Jack had accepted the fact that he would work his whole life and never gave serious consideration to attending college, but certain promises given to Jack in his patriarchal blessing made him think twice about that.
I received what I thought was a very comforting and relaxing blessing that the Lord would see to it that I met and was privileged to marry a very choice daughter of Zion. And that had been on my mind a little bit, because to get called as a missionary at age 25 after spending 4 years in the service, I thought it was about time I was taking care of some of my matters. But he promised that, and he said one other thing that rattled my mind. He says the way would be opened whereby I could obtain an education to accomplish the work the Lord had in store for me.
Upon his return from the South, Jack immediately started school at Ricks College in January of 1951. There he studied zoology and botany, making loose plans to become a doctor. It was the following winter, while studying at Ricks, that Jack met the woman that would change his life forever. It was there, at a school-sponsored dance, that Jack would be introduced to Lillian Barrett. Golden Wesley Barrett grew up in Benson, Utah, and there was raised on a farm. While still in his youth, he developed a hobby for trading, selling, and breeding chickens, and would often go to the county or state fair to participate in competitions. This would not be his profession, however. He would eventually end up in the cattle business. One day, while picking beets on a neighbor's beet farm for some extra money, he noticed a bright young girl who would come to the home to take care of the owner's wife, who had just given birth to their first child.
She must have been in her late teens, probably, my mother. And my father and some other young men were out in the beet fields of this home. There were sugar beets, and they were out working in the beet fields. And they noticed Mother when she would, or my dad noticed Mother when she'd come out of the house to do something. And so the men would take every chance they could to come close to the house, hoping that they would see her. And they would swing and fool around close to the house. And then they went together from then on. And she said they just kind of slid into marriage. It wasn't as if they had made some big decision and he had asked her. It was just understood that they would be married.
Without much effort, the two began the process of courtship and were married less than a year later in the Logan LDS Temple. The young couple didn't waste much time in starting a family of their own. Just less than a year after their marriage, a daughter, Irene, was born. She would be followed by Margaret, Golden Wesley Jr., Theda, Lillian, and Chester. They stayed in Logan for a few years, but Golden's cattle business took the family to California, where the children would grow up. Lillian, the second to the youngest in the family, was only 3 years old when the family left Utah. She would grow up primarily in Compton, California, then a beautiful little community just south of Los Angeles.
The first home I really remember living in was in Compton, California, and it was on a dead-end street, San Luis Street. And we did everything. We had no telephone, we had no TV, we had no computers, but we did everything outside. When I was quite young, we would play cowboys and Indians and hopscotch, and we would roller skate. Oh, we loved to roller skate, but we had no sidewalks. And in the middle of that block where we roller skated around was a big pear tree. And it belonged to nobody as far as we knew, because there was nothing on that block but that pear tree in the middle. And we would eat green pears, yellow pears, any kind of pears. But there was a Mrs. Tucker that lived a little ways away from us who had come to collect pears, and we thought she was a witch. We really did. And when she would come to pick up pears off the ground, we scattered. We were so afraid of her.
The years would pass by, and Lillian soon graduated from high school at age 17. Not ready to leave the comfort of home quite yet, she got a job at a local department store. About a year after graduating, Lillian met and fell in love with a young man by the name of Roland Sponberg. The young couple dated for 6 months or so and became unofficially engaged. Roland was the son of the local stake president and planned on marrying Lillian in the temple. But fate would not allow this to happen, as tragedy struck late one night while Roland was driving around town with some friends. Roland would somehow lose control of the vehicle, running it head-on into a tree, killing Roland almost instantly. The news was a devastating blow to Lillian, who ended up taking several months off work to collect herself and regain her composure. Of course, she bounced back and did so with a renewed zeal and sense of determination. At age 19, Lillian would accept a call to serve as a stake missionary, a demanding calling that would occupy much of her time.
We'd have a companion. My companion was Sister Smale. She was probably in her 50s. She and I went out once a week, tracting. And then I went to what they called Rancho Las Amigas Hospital, where people would kind of go if they were not going to make it. I was frightened to go tracting. And Sister Smale wasn't at all. She was so forward that sometimes that bothered me. But she wasn't frightened. All in all, I enjoyed my stake mission. It helped me to grow up in the gospel a little bit.
She served faithfully and diligently and gained an appreciation for the gospel of Jesus Christ that she never had before. She was working hard and enjoying life, and this was just the beginning. A few years later, her life would take another unexpected turn when she was informed that she had earned a scholarship to attend Ricks College in Rexburg, Idaho. She excitedly accepted, and for the first time in her life moved away from home, leaving her friends and family in California. While at Ricks College, Lillian soon made many friends, but kept herself aloof of the dating market by staying true to a missionary she had become involved with. It was during this time that she made friends with a young man from Ashton, Idaho, Jack Kidd.
I didn't go to Ricks until January, and that was the beginning of a new quarter. And I was in the office kind of getting signed up and everything. And
that was January of 1952.
Yes.
And one of the roommates, Carrie Hines, who was Clark's age and had been one of his friends growing up, came back to the apartment and said, "Jack, I met your wife today."
And I didn't know that I had seen Carrie Hines in the office. I saw him there while I was signing up, and then later I discovered that he's the one that told Jack he had just met my wife, or seen his wife, just met his wife, or seen. I didn't meet him, I just saw him in the office.
Well, you must have met him because he said, "She is a cutie."
Well, he can know I'm a cutie without meeting him.
Yeah, but he said, "She's got a sense of humor. We had a good time, and you need to meet her."
Okay, I don't remember talking to him. I remember seeing him face to face.
Well, you're so popular, probably.
Honey, I just barely got there. I wasn't popular.
But you didn't notice the men. They just noticed you.
I see, okay.
And so I could hardly wait.
I thought Carrie was kind of cute, too.
Well, he was. He was cuter than I was.
Well, so we met at an MIA dance, didn't we?
That's the first time I laid eyes on you. All I can remember is that you were laughing and seemingly having a wonderful time on stage.
I was. Well, then you walked me home, didn't you?
Well, we danced. And
oh, yeah, we danced. There was a dance afterwards.
Carrie saw to it that I met you, and we danced. And, and then you told me that you were engaged, and I said, "That's wonderful."
You didn't say that to me. That's
Well,
wonderful. You said it inside your head.
Yeah, I said it inside my head because I was afraid to get very close to any women folk, because I didn't have any money and I didn't have any time.
He knew I was engaged. I was waiting for a missionary, and
She was fun and full of mischief, and I walked her home. She was engaged to a returned missionary, or to a missionary who was still out in California, and that made her safe because I knew I couldn't get involved.
when we walked home, it was a snowy night.
Yeah, and we threw snow on you.
Yeah, and you threw me in the snow.
Yeah. If I'd known you were going to be my wife, I'd have covered
You'd
you
been more
up.
careful. And I took his watch and was winding the stem around to change the time, and it upset him. He said, "Don't do that." I thought it was funny, but you didn't, did you?
No, I didn't. But I thought it was funny when I threw snow in your face.
Yeah, that was okay.
But you didn't think it was funny.
Oh, that was all right.
And then lo and behold, she got a Dear John from her missionary, or a Dear Jane, or whatever you call them.
He wrote me a scathing letter.
And she was in tears.
I just can hardly forget how I felt that day. My heart just fell right out of my body. I was so devastated.
And I comforted her.
I became interested in Jack because everybody liked him. He was older, he was 28, and I was 22.
First thing I knew, I don't know how our engagement happened. It just did. It wasn't planned. I did not have a ring. I couldn't afford one. I gave her my fraternity pin, returned missionary fraternity pin, and that was the token of our engagement.
One evening he asked me if I would wear his pin, and so I knew what that meant, and so I did, and I had it on my dress the next day when I went to school, and there was all this ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, you know.
The next morning I thought, what in the world have I done? I gotta see her first off and put a kibosh on this. When I finally met her about noon, I said, you know, I've been looking for you. I thought maybe we'd overstepped our judgment last night, but I don't know how we get out of this now. I've seen a dozen people that have congratulated me on our engagement.
You never really said, "Will you marry me?" And I never said I would. It just happened.
But you arrived back in Ashton with your suitcase packed and ready to go to the temple.
My dad and your brother were the witnesses at the temple,
And I didn't even know Clark was coming.
because that's really all he had.
And I don't know that there were any others.
Why didn't Nilda come?
I didn't invite her. I didn't know you were supposed to do those kinds of things.
No, we didn't.
We didn't have anybody to coach us.
Isn't that amazing?
It was just a miracle the Lord ever managed to get us through that.
That's why it's a good thing it was foreordained. Otherwise, it could never have happened.
I think the Lord asked you, because I know I didn't.
It didn't take long for Jack and Lillian to start a family of their own. Within their first year of marriage, their first child, Norma, was born. Meanwhile, Jack was still working on his bachelor's degree at Ricks College. Shortly thereafter, their second child, David, would be born. The family grew and blossomed as Jack kept his hands full with school and work, and Lillian kept her hands full with the two children. Jack would earn his bachelor's degree in 1955, at which point the family moved to Provo, Utah, where Jack would attend Brigham Young University to get his master's. The family then moved to Logan, Utah, where Jack began his work at the Institute at Utah State University. The family lived there for 4 years before moving again. It was there that Jack and Lillian bought their first home in the heart of town. It was also in Logan that their third child, Janet, was born. But their stay wasn't permanent. Jack had been offered a job as the Institute director at UCLA. The family packed up and moved again, this time to Santa Monica, California. Their stay in California didn't last long. Although Jack enjoyed his work at UCLA, he knew that his family belonged in Utah. Lillian became pregnant with their fourth and last child. Norma became ill, suffering from severe allergies and pneumonia. After only a year in Santa Monica, the family moved back to Logan. Almost immediately after returning, Lillian gave birth to Carol. Jack took his job back as an instructor at the USU Institute, where he taught courses on marriage. People loved Jack and trusted him. He was constantly being sought out by students and non-students alike for advice and counseling. He gladly gave his services to these people and did so without ever charging them a dime.
Often I would wait up, everyone else would have gone to bed, and I would be waiting up for him to come home to ask his advice on something. And I remember waiting up once, and he finally came home at 2 a.m, and he had no sooner come in, and I think I was heating up some soup for him to eat. He hadn't had dinner yet, and the doorbell rang, and a woman had been sitting in her car out in front of the house waiting for him to come home so that she could talk to him.
With 4 children, a house payment, and a somewhat dismal income, times were hard for the Kidd family. Things got even harder when Jack decided to go back to school to receive his doctorate in social psychology. This would require him to take a second job as a garbage man for Logan City to help make ends meet.
One of my childhood memories is of my dad being a garbage man. And that's not a negative memory at all. We were very proud of him because it was so cool to wake up early in the morning to the noise of the garbage truck and then be able to wave to my dad, who was on the back of that truck, and watch him jump off the truck and pick up our garbage and dump it into the truck, jump back on the truck and wave to us in the front picture window of our home. We were really excited to know the garbage man.
Despite the hard times, Jack and Lillian still made life fun for themselves and for the children. They would take a vacation every year, usually to Yellowstone National Park in western Wyoming, along with Lillian's parents. The family also took roller skating lessons at the local roller rink. They also had many family traditions, such as Sunday night games.
For us, Sunday night preparations started on Saturday when we'd grab a gallon jug out of the storage room or the back porch and take it to A&W root beer. And then we'd bring that root beer home and put it in the fridge and go to church on Sunday morning. And then, of course, again, we'd go to sacrament meetings Sunday night. But as soon as sacrament meeting was over, we would race home to be the first child home to be able to start the popcorn popper.
Sunday nights involve 3 things: popcorn, root beer, and games. And we'd get around the kitchen table and play games. Now, Dad would not win a game if it meant somebody else had to lose. You know, we would play games where you could send somebody back or you could penalize somebody in the course of the game. Well, he wouldn't. He absolutely refused. He would help people. And we would, as children, Dad, you can't do that. You have to, you're supposed to send him back or hurt him. And he says, oh, I can't do that. I don't want to do that.
It meant the world to me. And when that ended, that was the hardest. You know, to have siblings leave home was hard, but it kind of gave me a sense of comfort and security to know that I could always count on that every Sunday night. And it was just fun.
In a blur of time, the children all grew up and left home. Norma got married and started a family. David left on a mission to Thailand, then married upon his return. Janet married shortly afterwards. Carol, the youngest, served a mission in Michigan before she, too, was married. All 4 children were married in the temple. Jack would retire from serving as institute director at USU in 1979 and would be honored for his years of selfless service. But the service didn't end there. Jack and Lillian immediately got to work serving as ordnance workers in the Logan Temple. After serving faithfully in the temple for several years, Jack would soon receive a call to serve as the temple president. He accepted the call. He and Lillian would make the trip to Salt Lake City, where they were set apart as temple president and matron by President James E. Faust, the second counselor in the first presidency. The two served faithfully for 3 years and took great joy in their callings.
Without question, my family has provided the most happiness to me of anything else. I am so grateful for each of the children. I am so grateful for Lillian, and the joy that I feel cannot be expressed.
I can remember my mother saying once after all of us children had left home that the greatest happiness she ever had was when the children were home, when we were all there. And I can relate to that because having the family around is the greatest happiness. Whether they're with you at home when you're raising them, or whether they're married and still a part of your life, the family brings the greatest happiness. And I guess it will forever.
I hope my children and grandchildren will know how dearly I love them and how I pray for them and how I believe in them and fully expect that they will sometime in the course of this mortal life come to know Christ as I feel I have come to know Him through hard knocks, through prayer, and through personal revelation.